Hey everybody, this is Jonathan David Lewis. I am Partner and Strategy Director at McKee a new author of Brand versus Wild, and a Forbes contributor. I'm really excited today to be on Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, where I'm going to share with you the key to the new economy in one word: resilience. So stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're going to take an insider look at why, in the face of constant change, disruption, and even destruction, most people and even their organizations go under, while others survive and thrive. Why is that? If you're a new listener, a new viewer to the show, strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular, thank you for joining us and making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We're deeply grateful to you and to Inc.com for making us the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. And remember, we need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, C-suite executive, sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that it's wild out there. And in many ways, the psychology of business and branding has vastly changed. What worked doesn't work. And often it seems like what was up is now down, and maybe what we need to do is throw out the handbook and apply the latest survival psychology to really making it through. Well, stay tuned, because you're about to find out exactly how to do that. My guest today is Jonathan David Lewis. He's the author of Brand versus Wild: Building Resilient Brands for Harsh Business Environments. Jonathan David Lewis is an engaging and authoritative speaker on shaping a brand that can survive and thrive in today's tough and certainly uncertain world. As a partner and strategic director at McKee Wallwork Company, Jonathan led his firm to be recognized by industry purveyor Advertising Age as the national leader in branding and marketing, winning the Southwest Small Agency of the Year, National B2B Campaign, and National Best Place to Work Awards. Not bad. So ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome Jonathan David Lewis.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for that mighty introduction.
You're welcome, mate. I know you've been doing a ton of interviews because you've been doing a book, and hey, you don't want to hear another boring introduction, so we get right into it.
That might have been the best so far. I love it.
Fabulous. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
With your bio, and there's much more to it than what I just called out, but there's a big bio there. It's easy for people to just sort of see you as this city boy born and raised, but you have your own wild history that's a little bit different than a city boy. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up.
Yeah, honestly, I've always been the underdog. A lot of people will look at me, see what they see, and make their judgments, which we all do. We're human.
Of course.
My story's a little bit different. I grew up on a tiny Indian reservation called the McKee Indian Reservation up in Nia Bay, Washington. And, later I moved to the big city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and, blew my mind. Again, a very different culture, even from the rest of the United States, let alone the world. And so I've had a lot of a very diverse experience in life, being one of the few white kids on the reservation when I was young, growing up in a minority majority state of New Mexico, very, very diverse here. And with that perspective matched with what I see as a really great strength of being a millennial in the midst of uncertainty and change, like our world hasn't seen it for generations.
Right.
Just have a very different perspective on what it takes to succeed today, and how a lot of what we used to, or what many of us still assume is required for success, just is different. It's changed fundamentally because of technology, because of the pace of change. Things are different, and so I have a pretty opinionated perspective on my own generation and what we have to offer. That's a little bit different than perhaps a lot of folks think. But anyway, that's some of my background.
So I want to go into the research and the strategies and the systems you've put in place, because I know they're very fascinating. But I want to sort of go to a little bit deeper psychology piece for a minute and ask you, being the only white kid in a native community, which you and I had talked about before we were recording, and then moving to Albuquerque, which is again another place of minorities. I wonder how that directly assisted you in being a leader, in being an innovator, and how did it? Do you feel like it shaped you?
Absolutely. I am who I am because of those experiences, which it's interesting today how big of a topic race is in the country.
Yeah.
And even the perspective. I'll start with Albuquerque and New Mexico as a whole, where racism is everywhere because it's in human hearts. But certainly a perspective growing up here or living here in New Mexico. We don't have racism like it occurs in other parts of the country. We're very diverse, and you kind of just grow up with a lot of different colors. And it's not even something you think about. You live together, you operate together, you eat together, you play sports together. And so it's a much different, it's almost surprising when we see the harsh dividing lines in other communities around the country. Because it's something we're not obsessed with, because we have different histories here. Certainly there's racism in our history, of course, but modern day New Mexico, it's something I see as a model for a lot of other communities that they can learn from in how we operate and how we learned to get along and in fact de-emphasize some of the dividing lines as we all try to get along. Being one of the only white kids on the reservation, I guess. So first, I'll say this: there's not a more beautiful place on earth than Neah Bay, Washington. The rugged, raw beauty of Washington State, the fierce nature of the terrain and the weather. I mean, it'll put you in awe and remind you how small you are.
Exactly,
and certainly, I've taken that as a leader. When my head gets too big, which happens often. I'm often reminded, whether it's my wife or my childhood or whoever, that I'm reminded how small I am.
Right.
But then the culture and the people and fear was a big part of my childhood as I dealt with racism and being different and all those things. And so fear was a big part of me, and something I've noticed as I've grown into who I am, that has flipped into a fire that inspires me. I'm still afraid. I still have a lot of insecurity, deep insecurity, but that has really driven me. And so I think that's part of my current ambition, is started with a lot of the insecurities and fear. But then there's the other part of just learning how to deal with really harsh circumstances and environments and people who may not see the world the way you see the world and have had a very different experience. And the beautiful people of Neah Bay have their own history, their own culture, and they've been abused in the past by other cultures. And so that adds up to something. And so I think as I've left there, I still have a lot of wonderful friends there, but as I've left, what I've taken with me is I understood how little other cultures can really understand other culture. I mean, the white world just doesn't get Native culture in many ways, and because we apply our own value system and we filter everything through our worldview as we look at them, and so we make these judgments where something that we would see as negative can even be positive. On a lot of the reservations, or certainly the reservation I grew up on. So learning to put myself in other cultures and see the world from their perspective, and understanding how powerfully separate we can all be based on our preconceived notions. Again, humbling and something that is completely fuel. I mean, my job literally today is to have empathy and understand other cultures.
Absolutely.
maybe not ethnic, but certainly in other regards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's in my DNA. That's how I grew up, and that's what I use
It's
today.
fascinating because, as you know, I've lived around the world in different places and different cultures, and people often in North America, particularly people who haven't traveled a lot, will say to me, that must have been a wonderful experience, and it was, but it wasn't as shocking for me as it was for a lot of people, because where I grew up, my best friends were Jamaican, they were Pakistani, they were
Yep.
Indian, they were Chinese, they were Ukrainian, they were Russian, they were Polish. So I had all those people around me. And by the way, we used all the politically incorrect statements for each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was nobody was offended
Yeah.
because in a politically correct world, I know we can't say those kinds of things, but the understanding was that we actually had a lot of respect for each other's cultures, and when we used those terms, there was no malice. And I think a lot of the time it's the malice, it's the intent underneath that causes the problem. But I mean, I loved going to my Paki friends' houses for dinner. I mean, my favorite food is curry,
Yeah.
and my Jamoke friends' houses. I mean, these are things you're not supposed to say, but there was never any malice in it, no more than when they called me a tight-ass Jew, even though I was born Jewish, but we're not particularly religious, and I've never been a tight ass. But it was never meant with, I never took it with any malice, and I think it's a great it's been a great lesson for me in leadership, and I can see how it would be in branding and marketing, is the willingness the ability, as you said, to have empathy and step into the other shoes, not from a place of sympathy and, oh, you poor dear, but actually going, yeah, okay, I get it.
Right.
So
Right.
that's why I wanted to ask you about that right at the front of the show, because I want people to grasp that
Absolutely.
so much of it is about not sympathy, but empathy. There's a vast
Mhm.
difference between those two things.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah. I mean, certainly with this, the sympathy, the bad side of sympathy or the incorrect sympathy would be looking down on others
Of
and the
course.
pretension, because we all think our culture and our worldview is the only or the best, and
Absolutely.
there's just so many out there, and that
Yeah.
again is humbling. And I would go back to I think it's really interesting how you brought up the idea or the subject of using non-politically correct terms with each other. I mean, that's something that I didn't understand even until I moved off the res, and the sense of humor is just wildly different. No, I was an alien on another planet for years because
Sure.
I had a fundamentally different sense of humor where we would interact through negative humor, and that
Exactly.
it in this world it's negative humor. In that world it's just humor, and
Exactly.
even the using off color language and maybe things that aren't politically correct. When there's malice behind it, yes, obviously it's evil. It can be evil, the words you speak. Well, the difference is when you have a relationship with somebody, just like when you're ribbing your friends, it's a way of communicating. If you trust somebody and like somebody, then yeah, you kind of rib them and you have fun with it. And you, by pointing out some of those differences, by whether it's color or background or whatever, if you have a relationship and you're actually friends, then it's just like anything else. It's part of, yeah, we're different, but we're bonded by something deeper than our something on the surface. And that's
Exactly.
it's hard for people to grasp that unless you've had that experience.
Exactly. I think that's very well put. Is that if you don't have a relationship, then yes, it can certainly be offensive. But but the relationship takes a lot of that away. And I always say, for years my friends would say to me, "How do you get away with saying the shit you say to your wife?" And I said, because she knows that I'm being playful. And for
Right.
anything that you read as derogatory, which it never is, I have the most respect for my wife of any human being on the planet. It's playful, and she reads it as playful. She says shit to me that's playful. I had a bump on my head, and my nickname from her was Buckethead. And people were like, "Oh my God, how do you say that, Tim?" I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like, I was crying laughing. But I
Hmm.
think we don't have enough sense of humor about who we are. We don't have enough sense of humor about our relationships. And I think it's a great lesson in leadership and in marketing. And I think it's a very appropriate way to start this particular episode. In your new book, Brand versus Wild, you speak about the correlation of more than a decade of proprietary research and looking at survival psychology and being able to identify and articulate the essential qualities of a survivalist, and putting those into modern marketing. Tell us a little bit about what survival psychology can teach us about human nature, particularly in the context of business. That's a fascinating point of differentiation.
Yeah, I mean, it really came down to this. That research you talked about. We've conducted 2 national studies. We've written 3 books. We've done all this stuff. And it's very business oriented. And kind of to shorten it into a couple sentences, what we discovered is that there's 7 things that affect growth in companies, because that's all we care about. What is growth? Right. 7 things. 3 of them are things you'd expect: the economy, competitive environments, or disruption or something. Okay, that's important and good to understand. This is what got us excited. 4 of those 7 things are internal, that are statistically significant in predicting growth. and so it's things like alignment, focus inside of a company, courage or lack of courage, how erratic a team is. Those things are predictive of growth issues. And we got excited because those are things we can control. I can't control the economy or Uber coming along and disrupting me. I can control me. I can influence my team. But what was interesting is, as we understood that from a business kind of scientific left brain perspective, suddenly we became, we're kind of in the wild. We're in the wilderness out here in New Mexico, which is a strength and a weakness when you consider business. But something we begin to understand over time is how highly correlated our left brain business research was with the latest in survival psychology. So much so that I can say kind of crazy things like, at the end of the day, there's very little difference between you and how you react to any sort of challenge or disruption and a group of people crash landed on a mountain or in the desert, or we go through a very predictable response to disruption. And so survival psychology, I think the reason it's resonating with our culture right now is because it touches on one key concept: resilience. Mm-hmm. And resilience is what's required when the world is fundamentally uncertain, and more uncertain than ever in history. And so that's where I'm getting a lot of feedback, is people are understanding it's not about having the biggest castle, because the armies are going to go around the castle, right? It's not about strength or size. It's about resilience and adaptability and the ability to face hardship and find a way to sustainably grow through it.
And most leadership consultants out there are offering another tactic or another strategy. But in many ways, resilience might be seen as a soft skill. But you say it's the new strategic imperative. Tell us about that.
So that's right. And I think something you just touched on there that's really powerful is the whole notion that there's soft skills. Well, what we've discovered through hard research is that those soft skills have hard results, and so much so that they're predictive of growth.
Absolutely.
Far more. So this is the bottom line, both in our research and in survival psychology. The difference between people like Ernest Shackleton, who try to traverse Antarctica and almost die and finally save their crew, and Teddy Roosevelt, who goes down the Amazon River and almost dies and finds a way through. The difference between them and those that actually do die in survival scenarios has nothing to do with external anything. It doesn't matter how many supplies you have, how smart you are, how talented your team is. The difference was how healthy your team was, how healthy your internal dynamics are. It's the fuzzy stuff. Right. That's where the power is. And so even the notion that, because I hear it all the time, I'm sure you hear it as well, that's the fluffy stuff. Oh, that's the fuzzy stuff. That's the stuff that matters. Right. So in terms of resilience being in the new strategic imperative, which a lot of buzzwords there, sorry. The idea of that is really that the last 100 years, business success has been found in concepts of size. The bigger you are, the more successful you are. Scale, The bigger you are, the more pricing power you have. Longevity. I've been in business 50 years. I have better relationships, more industry knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. All of these are old concepts of success, even to such a degree that they actually can be vulnerabilities today. Because the cycle of disruption, every company, I mean, what was it, yesterday or the day before? Lego just announced enormous cuts. They're cutting like 10% of their workforce. Lego, they've been on a tear for 15 years. They're one of one of the biggest toy makers in the world, in which, 15 years ago, they were also down. They're going through another cycle of disruption. The thing is, those cycles of disruption, which you and I and everybody that's listening will go through, you can't run away from it.
No.
They're happening faster and faster. So because of that, there are things like resilience being kind of the foundational idea, but things like adaptability being more important than strength, or flexibility being more important than strength, or connection being more important than craft. All of these ideas that are fundamental now to a successful company, because you have to be ready to internally deal with enormous change and disruption, which is a very human thing. There are a lot of smart people. You and I are really smart. We could probably take a look at most business challenges and come back with a pretty good solution.
Sure.
That's like checking the box.
Right.
It doesn't matter how good the solution is if everybody on the team is passive aggressive and isn't going to implement it and doesn't trust the person saying it. Those are the core issues. So we have to start there, and that's the foundation of resilience, is relationship.
And that's what I was going to ask you. So how do we get them started into resilience? Because, the argument might come back, well, I'm very resilient. I being the founder of the company, I being the CEO, I being the sales manager, whatever it is. But how do I build that resilience into my people? Because as you said, disruption is at every possible turn, and people live on the edge of, as we know, most people are living 2 paychecks away from desperation.
Right.
So how do we get them to embrace resilience and adaptability and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think there's some structural things every company can do, but starting at the very beginning, I think it's understanding. First and foremost, how we all are going to react. And that's where the survival psychology comes in. Well, Dr. John Leach, who's one of kind of the forerunners of survival psychology, he says that he has a theory called the 10-80-10 theory. He says that in every survival scenario, any disruption or challenge, all of us fall into 3 buckets of how we react. 10% of us are prepared, and so we're logical, we get through it, we can lead people through it. Probably most people listening to this show consider themselves part of that 10%, whether we are or not. We'll see.
Until the feces hits the fan.
Right. So, but we probably perceive ourselves that way. That's why we're listening. Yeah. 80% of us panic. 80% of humanity out there panic when they face a challenge. They don't know what to do, so they freeze. They don't do anything. And then another 10% of us make things worse. We actually make it more dangerous for you and I in these survival scenarios. And there's real science behind this, where you look at, there's a famous Manchester disaster where there's an airplane filled with people sitting on a tarmac about to take off, and a fire erupted. And what did the pilot do? He very calmly pulled the plane over, opened the exits, and ordered everybody off. Well, many people still perished in that fire, and the researchers were like, what is going on? They were trying to understand this, and what they found out was that even though there was plenty of time and people were taking orders, etc., people were so disrupted, so it was such an unexpected thing that a lot of the passengers simply sat in their seat and let the flames and fire take their lives. They froze. And that's probably most of your organization, my organization today. When something happens you're not expecting, you freeze. And so that's
fight, flight, or freeze.
Exactly. So so from a starting point, know yourself and know that it's fluid. It's not like we're born in 10% or 80%. What it really comes down to in those situations is vigilance. So any survivalist will tell you, they think about this stuff. If you travel a lot, like I'm sure you and I, we get on a plane at least once or twice a week. At that point, you kind of take for granted all the safety instructions. You're like, okay, I've heard this enough. I don't need to. A survivalist will say, Every single time, don't even miss a single time. Every time you enter a plane, count the seats as you walk back to your seat, from the exit to your seat. Open the pamphlet, look at the notes, listen to the person giving you the instructions, because if you're not vigilant with even the foundational stuff and a disaster strikes, a fire erupts, you're going to lose your mind. I mean, the science, the survival psychology tells us physiologically you will lose your mind. You act completely irrationally, even if you think you won't, even if you think you're in the 10%, because you're not prepared. It's about vigilance. So not only being vigilant yourself, but enabling your team to be vigilant about the right things.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that because I think it's important for people to understand. So, first of all, it's easy to assume that you will be cool as a cucumber in a chaotic situation. But here's what you need to know, and this is why being so well prepared is so important, is that under stress, high level extreme stress, you are 27% dumber than you are normally. Now, I don't say that lightly. I want to be really true to people. What I'm telling you is that 27% of the blood flow to the frontal lobe of your brain, the part of your brain you think with, is actually cut off. It goes to your feet and to your hands and to your arms and to your legs to get you the hell out of there, or to freeze you down with cortisol. So as all those hormones flush into your system, the blood is taken away from the part of your brain that thinks to higher levels. The amygdala, the part of the hippocampus, the parts of your brain that are reactive, go into reaction. And so you think you're a smart cookie, but smart people do dumb things in extreme situations, which is part of survival psychology. And being prepared, and not only prepared, but rehearsed for that is so, I so get what you're saying. It's really important. And because I'm often asked, how did I survive what happened to me? Do you know any of that, by the way?
I don't know.
Okay. 1990, in 1990, I was an adrenaline junkie. I used to do all kinds of crazy ass shit all the time. And in 1990, very long story, very short, I was free climbing while soaking wet. So we did not have the right gear. Mountain climbing is crazy for a lot of people, but you have ropes and you have safety lines, etc. Free climbing is a bit nutty for most people because you don't have those things, but you have chalk and you have the right clothing, you have the right shoes. Not the right clothing, not the right shoes, and soaking wet, not a smart move. But hey, sign me up. And I did that. And at about 120 feet, which is 12 stories, I dislodged a rock that hit a bigger rock, hit me in the face, and knocked me 12 stories down to the bottom, where I smashed to pieces on the boulders below. And people ask me, how did you survive? And I had that survival mentality. There's no doubt about it. It kicked in. I paid attention, even though I was in complete, total mess. And when asked afterwards, because I did have a buddy with me, and they said, how did you do it? And the answer was, I have no idea. I don't know how he did it. But it's that automatic, but it's rehearsed. Now, in fairness to everybody, for me, I had studied psychology since I was a child. Number one. Number two, my childhood was pretty traumatic. And by the way, trauma trains hypervigilance. Trauma trains, so get this, if you went through some shit in your childhood, that is a curse, but it's also a blessing in that it can give you the predisposition to have created levels of hypervigilance. The problem is that hypervigilance will steal the joy out of your life if you're not careful, because you become hypervigilant looking for trauma when there is none. So it's about applied hypervigilance, which is also another point. So it's, you and I could spend a long time just on this because I think it's a very, very interesting subject.
Absolutely. When you mention how someone asks you, how did you do it? And I don't know. I just did it. I mean, that's where you see in a lot of these survival scenarios, people don't even remember what happened. They make it through a period of time. It can be an extended period of time. They're literally, their brain shuts off. They're on automatic. And you mentioned the blood flow, etc. There are troubling and fascinating stories of people when they get lost. Just kind of basically, you're camping and you get lost on a trail or something.
Right.
And people tend to do one of three things. They throw their stuff down, which is crazy. They often run, which is crazy. Why would you run? You don't know where you're going. Or third, there's even documented instances where people hide. They hide from rescuers when they're lost, which is nuts. You and I sitting here, are you kidding me? It's crazy. When you're in that situation, and if you're not prepared, if it's not even, to your point, if it's not something that you've prepared for and trained for, then whatever is the most recent, instinct is going to take over, and you often don't even have a choice. And that's why any Boy Scout will tell you, if you're in a moment, maybe if you're not, your back's not broken because you fell 12 stories, that's incredible. But if you're in a moment of crisis, if you're lost, for instance, any Boy Scout will tell you the first thing you have to do if you hope to survive is stop. You have to stop. And it's physiological and psychological, but you have to stop for a physiological reason because, as you described, your body has taken over and is driving you towards bad decisions. Right. If you need to jump out of the way of a bear, you want your body to take over. If you want to find your way out of the forest, you need your mind. Yeah. And so you have to stop and you have to sit down. You have to really take a moment, calm yourself so that you can begin to think rationally. And that's something a lot of us as leaders, we're action oriented. The last thing we want to do in especially a crisis or a serious situation is stop. Are you kidding me? Action, action, action. We got to fix this. We got to get to it. And so it's extremely uncomfortable often to take a moment of silence and sometimes solitude to gather yourself. And with your team, allow your team the freedom to do that. Because as a leader, often we'll also demand a lot more from our team in those moments. Well, you need to give them some room to orient themselves to what is going on. So there's a lot of lessons here when you consider there's very little difference between you falling off a cliff and having to survive that and make your way to safety and whatever happened there, and you sitting in a boardroom and your sales just fell off a cliff, or you just got acquired, or whatever the case may be. Physiologically and psychologically, you're going through the same steps.
But you said something that I think is profound and everybody has to pay attention to it, and that is that particularly for those of us in leadership positions, we think that leadership is action. And it's actionable, but it's also being connected to why you're taking the action, knowing the right action to take rather than being reactive. And there's a difference between action and reaction. And I think that most people don't realize that, particularly in these highly disruptive times. You just found out that your blockbuster and Netflix arrived. It's very easy to get frozen or because those are the two things, is to get frozen or to go into crazy action that's irrelevant. And actually to stop, which is not freezing, but actually to stop and, quote, breathe and just go, okay, what's next? And how do we breathe through this? And that, it's that old saying we all learned from our moms, which is stop, breathe, and count to 10. It's a very good, simple solution that you don't need a degree in psychology for. It's like just to get the blood flow back to that frontal lobe. So it's a fascinating piece. What would be your simple best direction, guidance to a leader listening to us, watching us, who is in that situation right now? As you said, the sales have dropped off the cliff. The Uber of their industry has just arrived. There's been an M&A that wasn't expected. What would you say to them?
That I would say simply this: you can survive anything, and in fact, you can thrive through anything. The human capacity to survive is near miraculous. And in fact, the whole study of the will to live is kind of creepy. It's kind of mystical, even, where you get into even Good to Great, and Jim Collins has looked at this a little bit, but when you get into prison camps, in Vietnam or the Korean War, etc., and you look at how two prisoners, the same condition, one will choose to live and live. Yes. One will choose mentally, emotionally, spiritually to die and will die. Absolutely. And it's not a matter of how healthy you are, how much food you have. It's a matter of the will. So this is what I would say. You can do this. You are capable of anything if you choose. And as a leader, it's not just you. It's your ability to get those around you to choose to live that is the difference between your organization getting through a hard time and not. And it starts with you. You have to actually believe and commit to the idea that you can survive this and then grow and thrive through it. And this is the survival psychology has documented this thing called the will to live, yet doesn't understand it at all. They
Right.
know it exists. They don't know how it works or why it works.
Right.
But the will to live can get you through anything. And I've seen the research. I've read the stories. There are, like you, falling off a cliff. There are things that people should not have survived, but because they wanted to, they did.
You know, it's you said something in there that I think is very interesting that we have to come back to, which is it's particularly for a leader, it's not just your own will to survive, but it's evoking other people's will to survive. I've got a great example of that, actually, a guest on our show, Peter Sage, very good friend of mine, leadership guy, has done amazing things in his life. But what people didn't, or often didn't know about Peter, they do now because of the show, is Peter was put in prison. He went to jail and served. He was sentenced to 18 months, served 6 months, and has no criminal record. He was not convicted of a crime. He went to prison for contempt, and actually got sent to Pentonville, which is it's the hardest prison in the UK. So, you know, whatever those shows you've seen on TV about prison, times it by 10, that's where he was sent. And I've read the letters, because I was one of the first people he called when he came out. I've read the letters from the governor, from the wardens, from other prisoners, of how he transformed the prison, transformed the culture of the prison, because he got sentenced and went, oh, yeah, I got sentenced for contempt, which he did. That's my ego, and actually got, okay, this is a lesson for my ego, and walked down the steps into the detainment, smiling, and people were like, somebody asked him, was he an undercover cop? And he just said, no, I know what I'm here for. And because he went in with a mentality which would have destroyed 99.9% of people who consider themselves strong. But here's the thing, he didn't just go in to survive, he went in to improve the lives of others. And that's what you're saying about, it's not enough to say, I'm in this situation and I have to survive. I have to make sure others survive as well. And when we watch those movies and we read those books, it's the person who had the will to have others survive, who ignited that in others. And when we are a company, when we're a leader, it's not good enough to say, I'm going to make it through this. It's got to be the whipping up of others and bringing them to that place, getting them out of that survival mechanism of fight, flight, or freeze, and to say, how can we bring that frontal lobe back and grow this company and create a brand that not only, as you said, not only survives, but thrives. It's a fascinating piece of psychology.
First of all, man, are there lessons we can learn from that man's story? I mean, when you consider the humility to recognize he was wrong, to accept the pain he was about to go through, and then turn it into something positive by learning from it, and then the what puts that person over the top is what he did with that, in that he didn't just learn from it. All of a sudden, everyone around him learned from that. I mean, that is leadership. What else is it? It started with humility. And
exactly.
if there's one thing that happens to you and I when we're afraid or when we're disrupted, whatever, we become very selfish. Yes. And that's why the one of the four predictable or predictive qualities of a company struggling with growth is that they turn savage. They turn on each other. They lack alignment. And that's because they're selfish. And from a human nature standpoint, my perspective is we all are. And that's why greatness is difficult. So selfishness is the enemy. And within an organization, certainly within a leader, and which sets up one of the, if not the essential qualities of a leader, of selflessness. And that's where you look at Ernest Shackleton, and a lot of people have heard this story. He wasn't just powerful and strong and experienced and all the things you need. He was selfless. People would follow him into hell and back because he would go with you into hell and back. He would go there himself. He wouldn't even make you go there. He was selfless. He, just like, we hear about Alexander the Great and all these other leaders who Alexander the Great, for instance, led every charge into battle. He was
Right.
willing to die, and because he was willing to die, everybody who fought in his army was willing to die. And so if you can get
Right.
to the point where that's why leadership is so hard, and that's why a great craftsperson or a great tactician, they tend to not be great leaders, because it's not about being great at doing something. It's about being great at being selfless and inspiring others through that selflessness.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I are definitely on the same page with this one. That's fantastic. This is a leadership show, so let's talk about the great white elephant, which is often politically incorrect, but I want to address it. What do you see, particularly with all your research and your studying and all these kind of things, what do you see as the current state of leadership today? And it could be political, it could be corporate, but in whatever way, what do you see as the current state of leadership?
That is political. I mean, I'm American, so when you consider American politics, there is a great void of leadership across the spectrum.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it arises because our challenges are so great, and they're compounding now. It's reached to the point where they're not just a few tough challenges; they're compounding challenges on each other, and nobody knows what to do. And so, in a situation like that, often leaders, quote unquote, heavy quotes there, leaders tend to become more extreme, which you're seeing on both ends of the spectrum, or they tend to be paralyzed. And exactly what we see in survival psychology. So we see the extremes, we see the paralysis, and overall, the people become dismayed and give up. They throw up their hands, and that's where you open the door to really, really bad leaders who are willing to at least have an opinion and at least show a quality of leadership, even if it's wrong. So we're in I think, a pretty dangerous and a pretty upsetting point politically, certainly, but even beyond that. And I'm not just referring to, everyone knows President Trump. I'm not just referring to that situation, which is pretty abnormal, but across the board, it's there as well. When you look at corporate leadership, we see the same thing, and I don't know if this is new, but often in corporate leadership,
it's magnified.
Yes. Right, where there's all these other incentives. There's almost every incentive, but to show leadership in corporate America. I mean, it's the incentive is to play it safe, and so corporate leadership is often reactive to whatever's going on, to the culture, to right and wrong. It's reactive. Okay, which way is the wind blowing? We're going to go that way. In that context, which can be pretty, demoralizing. In that context, there is, for you and I as leaders, there's an enormous opportunity because there is no leadership. Exactly. So those that show real traits of leadership stand above and beyond. And so regardless of politics or beliefs here, when you look at somebody like Elon Musk, he has an opinion. He could be wrong. Half of it or more may be wrong, but he has an opinion. So he's able to inspire a lot of money to follow him into pretty crazy places. Yes. Because he has an opinion. And when you look at companies like Whole Foods previously, who grew up by having an opinion about clean food, or Chick-fil-A, who is family oriented, and regardless of what you think about them, they have an opinion. Yep. Those are the companies we're seeing that are people are kind of they gravitate towards. It's like the sun, can't help but move towards it because it stands for something. It's showing a quality of leadership in a culture that doesn't have any.
Yeah, I think it's a very important place for all of us to recognize is that we are drawn to those who make a stand, even if the stand is wrong, even if the stand, Hitler was voted in. Let's always remember that. So we are drawn to people who make a stand. We may look back on history and go, ooh, poor decision, but we are drawn to people who make a stand. And it's important for us to recognize that. But we also need to evaluate that stand. And I think you pointed out something that's vitally important, which is to evaluate that stand from a place of selflessness. Martin Luther King never wanted to be the face of the civil rights movement. Gandhi never wanted to be the face of the political slant that would remove the British from India. Nelson Mandela didn't want to be the leader. I mean, it's fascinating for me that very often the leaders are reluctant. And when you get to a place where we're void of leadership, then that creates a space for the leaders who want it egoically, and then who have an opinion, and then the rest of the bunch flailing around and suddenly give away their own value systems to go along with something resembling leadership. But I think you've nailed something that's vitally important for us all to look at, which is, are you willing to lead? I mean, here's what I say. I speak and teach leaders how to speak. And one of the things I say is, are you willing to lead if no one ever knows your name? It's an important question. If no one ever knows your name, it's one of the things I loved of what Elon Musk did. His thing was to make for a better planet. That was part of his original purpose, to make the planet a better, cleaner planet. Mm-hmm. And he let every patent go for his electric engines. Yep. He gave them to the world. Now, any business person would say, you are crazy. This is insane. But that selfless act proved his purpose. And you know that my work is around purpose. And it's fine to say I have a purpose, but when the feces hits the fan, will you truly step into that? And giving away your patents, that's a pretty clear demonstration of, yep, I'm going to stand by my purpose, versus say what you want to hear so that I get the power position and then I can do whatever I want to do. Tell us quickly, who's a leader that you admire? Who's doing it differently?
This might be controversial, and in the context of the news today, it's probably very controversial. I look, in terms of leadership qualities and what a leader acts like and does, I really look up to Benjamin Netanyahu, who, really? When you look at, don't just look at it from our perspective, looking at Israel. If you are sitting in Israel, and you see enemies at all sides, and literally the whole world is telling you you're wrong, and making every move possible to make your life harder. In that scenario, he speaks truth. He isn't worried, and he does it eloquently, and he isn't worried about ruffling the feathers of the culture around him. He's willing to fight for his people. Right or wrong, depending on who's listening right now. I really appreciate the way he does it. It's not defamatory or derogatory, or he simply says it how it is, and he has a guiding principles to achieve what he's trying to achieve. So I look up to Benjamin Netanyahu.
That's very interesting. I will tell you that was not what I expected.
I knew it when I said it.
But it's great. That's great, because I think that it's important for us all to have people that we look up to, and why, not just because we're supposed to, but why, and actually be able to back that up. It's very fascinating for me as a traveler, somebody who was, again, I was born Jewish. And I'm definitely not a Zionist. So it's a fascinating piece. And I was in Iran this year speaking, and fascinated to hear Iranians speak about how they've got nothing. Every Iranian I met, oh, have you been to our synagogues? Have you met? Such a totally different political understanding. And it's why I appreciated what you said, which is try not to look at it from the outside. And it's one of the things, when I came back from Iran, I wrote a piece called The 12 Myths about Iran. And I wrote it because in an interview I was asked, well, what is it about traveling? And I said, I think as a speaker who travels the world, I have a responsibility to bring the humanity back from that country. Because Absolutely. It's very easy for us to dehumanize another country, whether it's Israel, whether it's Iran, wherever it is, and go, they're a bunch of crazies. As opposed to saying, no, there may be some crazy elements, but who are the people? I have many very good Israeli friends, very good Israeli friends that I speak with on a weekly basis, and they're not looking at the Palestinians in the way that other people do. I have Palestinian friends who don't look at Israel the way that other Palestinians do. So what I liked about your point was this: stop looking from the outside and see if you can get yourself on the inside psychology, which again is another shift of getting out of that reactive mind, which I think is so much of what it is that you're sharing and is so important.
Absolutely.
We're already moving towards the end of this fascinating conversation, and I'm guessing it's not where you've usually been going in your interviews.
Not quite, but
Not
it's
quite.
been great.
Yeah, that's good. One of the things that I believe is that the most successful people are obsessed, and we see that as a negative term, and I don't. I see, when I say obsessed, I mean if there's a conversation going on at a party and you're not part of it, but you hear it a little bit, you can't help but go over there. If there's a movie that has a thing in it that you're obsessed with, that's the part of the movie you talk about.
Mm-hmm.
What is it you find that you tend to be drawn to, that you tend to be a little bit obsessed with?
Obsessed. That's a great question. You sound like my wife. Who has said that to me? Sure. Who has said that to me before? Jonathan, you're obsessed. I get obsessed with different things, and then when I'm done, I'm done. I've figured it out, and then I move on to the next thing. And so I think I can't name a thing. I think I'm obsessed with the mystery. So whether it's the fact that we don't know what's under the crust of the earth, that we as humans think we know everything about everything. We've discovered everything there is to know. We know quantum physics and general relativity. We know everything. We don't know anything. No. And so simple questions like, what's under the crust of the earth? Well, that's interesting to me, and I'm going to attack that obsessively until I know what humans know, at least. Or Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The fact that fundamentally reality is more uncertain than we could ever imagine, and is more like a hologram than we assume it is. So I get obsessed with things, deep questions, and then I attack it until I've reached the limit of possible knowledge, and then I move on.
You and I could have some pretty interesting conversations, including Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which is one of my favorite things to study. I too am very obsessed with the things that other people don't think about, the things that are like, why don't you think about that? That's fascinating to me. So I get it. Tell me, one of the things I find interesting is that people often don't want to get there. They're wondering, when am I going to be there? And the problem with getting to a place where you are highly accoladed, or you are highly recognized or highly successful, is it can be easy to start thinking that you don't need to keep learning.
Yeah.
And what is something that you are currently working on that you might be challenged with in your own life, in your own business? What is something that you are working on right now?
Well, I think you've hit on something really important, and that is success itself can be one of the biggest enemies of success. Yes. Because the moment you're successful, your business, your career, is the moment you get arrogant, which is inherently selfish, and is the moment you can begin to believe that whatever made you successful will continue to make you successful. Absolutely. And we see it all the time with all our clients. I mean, you've had great success, and then all of a sudden you've got to call us because you got lazy. And so you've hit on a prime point there. I would say right now I am fundamentally changing the business model of my company and positioning it for a very different future. And if you look at, we grew up as an ad agency, and we've won all the ad agency top awards. We've proved we know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. We've really changed into a marketing consultancy, which is we help turn around stalled, stuck, and stale brands now. So right. We're straddling this world between consulting and marketing in a world where advertising, the old model, is quickly going away and changing, where I'm not going to be relevant in 5 years if I leave my business as it is today. And so I am quite literally going through what I've written about today with my entire company. And it's something we had to do 10, 12 years ago. We're going through another cycle today. Right. So that I think is my prime challenge, is to walk my talk. And I talk about this all day, every day. I wrote a book about it, and I'm going through it. So that's where I am today.
Fabulous. I want to ask you one final question here. Well, actually two final questions, but this one is, I'm sure you've been on interviews because it kind of has become part of the shtick now, is what is the best advice you'd give to your 20-year-old self? I'm not going to ask you that question because I'm definitely not your usual run-of-the-mill guy. I'm going to ask you this question. You get to go in a time machine and you get to visit with your 70-year-old self. What do you think your 70-year-old self would say to this Jonathan today?
Chill out.
Would your wife say the same? Because your
You're
wife may
obsessive,
be
John.
your 70-year-old self.
You're obsessing, Jonathan. Why'd you build a time machine? What are you doing here? Go back. Chill out. Chill out, bro. You know, go roll around in the grass with your son. Have a dinner with your family. Don't be so obsessed with success. I think that's what I'd say.
That's very cool. Well, I hope you'll listen to your 70-year-old self a little.
Right.
So what's the final piece of advice that you'd like, the direct, applicable, practical guidance that you'd like to give to our leaders as they're tuned in today, as they've been listening to this rather fascinating conversation?
You probably don't understand success in today's world and new economy. And the key in a word is resilience. And that has endless ramifications for how you structure your business, how you go to market, how you do your marketing. It has endless ramifications. But if you can remember one thing from this whole conversation, it's resilience.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. It's been a great conversation, my friend. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
Definitely.
Yeah. Please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you, about your new book, and about how to get in contact with you.
Well, of course, you can find Brand vs. Wild on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. Leave a review. That'd be helpful. And you can check me out and my company, McKee Wallwork Company, out at jonathandavidlewis.com. All the links to social, etc., are on there. So
fabulous. JonathanDavidLewis.com. And of course, we will post that with the show notes for today's show. I want to thank you for being here with us. It's been a great show. Really enjoyed having our conversation. As I said, I know that you and I could have gone for many more hours into all kinds of different avenues and a fabulous conversation. So thank you very much. We really appreciate you being with us. And I want to encourage you, dear listener, dear viewer, to make sure that you go back. I know people listen to podcasts in the background. Go back, listen again, take some notes. I'm sure you'll find some real gems that you can actually put into practice. And remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing even the fastest growing companies today can be somewhat counterintuitive in that these companies are spending an absolute fortune training, attracting, and developing top talent, but also having a turnover of those talent at crazy rates. If you're sick of investing in training and developing your talent only to have them leave before you've got your return on investment, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into the sole purpose of your organization. Because everybody that is in the workforce today who has the skills and talent you want is looking for meaningful work, and you've got to define that by knowing your purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Because why? Simple, because you can't outsource authenticity. Remember, you also get yourself over to the Matrix for your Authentic Leadership Matrix self-assessment tool, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. It's valued at $197, absolutely free to you for being a regular listener to us. Again, matrix, like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com for your Authentic Leadership Matrix self-assessment tool. Till next time, this is Dov Baron saying, stay curious, my friends, stay curious about the changes that are right around the corner that you might be taking for granted and how you can step into a deeper level of resilience. Till next time, this is Dov Baron, and I am out.